As we wrap up today's episode, we hope something we shared helped you, challenged you, or gave you a new perspective. If even one moment stood out, please share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. That's how this community grows, one conversation at a time. You can find us as Around the Fence Post on Facebook and Wet Meadow Seed on Facebook and Instagram. We appreciate you being here. We'll see you next time. Around the Fence. Welcome to Around the Fence Post, where grit meets growth, stories spark change, and real conversations build stronger farms and futures.
Welcome back to Around the Fence Post. I'm your host, Jacob Leach. Today I wanted to talk about some of the new things that have dropped with the USDA, and I know it's on my agenda and on my schedule somewhere to have some guys come over, guests come on and talk to this from a better place of knowledge than what I have. But I do look at these things and I do try to understand them so that when people ask me, I'm able to at least weigh in. Today we're talking about the new Regenerative Agricultural Executive Order. I don't care about the politics of it as much as how does it serve us and how does it not serve us. Obviously, regenerative has had a massive buzzword. I'd say the last 5 years, the last 10 years, we've started seeing the movement kind of taking off, and now people are really leaning into it more and more. And then the COVID stuff happened, and we really start seeing more people really paying attention to where the food comes from. So if somebody's able to point at that and the chest freezer full of beef and say, oh, we grew that, or a farmer grew that with regenerative ag and yada yada yada, I have the best food source. Those are things that happen quite naturally with being able to throw the buzzwords around. Again, I'm excited about it to a degree, but you also have to look through and see what's going to come back and bite us or not. One of my big things with the government being involved in anything is I know their heart's usually, I feel like, at least somewhat in a good place, but then when they get to starting to put everything together, it starts feeling as though they're mandating instead of encouraging through a volunteer basis, and encouraging through a volunteer basis, and then potentially being voluntold as a producer. That's one of the big things that I never want. And that's more as a citizen than anything. Is I don't want to be voluntold. I want to do the right thing or do what I feel is right, but still have my autonomy. So before we get into what's in the executive order, what is regenerative? What's regenerative ag? So the way I look at it is we're protecting soil, we're improving our forage and increasing resilience. We're increasing our cattle health by growing a more nutrient-dense forage. It's not, I think sometimes it almost comes off where you almost need to be a cult follower of some of this stuff, and that's not necessarily the case to that extent. I do think we have some very enthusiastic believers that can come off that way, where come off like a Baptist preacher on a Sunday morning type of thing, where, hey, let's talk about the actual pieces to this instead of simply being like, oh, we need it, you need it, doesn't matter what you're doing now, it's wrong, do this instead. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure there's education and a basis for why. So with regenerative ag, a lot of what we talk about is going back to what the buffalo herds did in the 1800s before buffalo hunters killed them all, right? So they would rotate. They would go from Texas to Canada every year, essentially grazing extremely heavy and then moving north, and then they turn around and come south. So what happens when they're moving off of it? Well, that ground is resting. Nobody's really pushing that grass hard. They rotate. They're actively moving forward. They're not coming back. They're not on the same 30 acres for 6 months and then move to the other 30 acres for the next 6 months. We don't have that. And that allows, when you have that rotation, it allows for recovery. So if you're already doing these things, if you're already allowing a rest period for your ground, if you're already moving your animals off of it so that they're not abusing your crop or your soil, you're already regenerative. I think that would apply to quite a few producers that are listening to this today. So what the executive order actually does is it's going to push the USDA and NRCS and state agencies towards a measurable outcome. So more emphasis on soil sampling, you should be anyway. More emphasis on forage sampling, you should be anyway. Pasture condition scoring, we don't do that as much. We don't talk about it as much. None of those things. So pasture condition scoring could easily be something that gets increased. And I think that would be something significant when it comes to looking at, am I given enough rest and recovery time or am I not? Grazing records. I talked to a gentleman last week that was talking about he's got one of those charts across his field. He's doing a standard measurement of 1 inch of 1 inch of growth in his pasture should be roughly 250 pounds per acre, and you only calculate that from the top down to whatever height you want to be at. If you go to my personal YouTube page, not my Around the Fence Post one, I believe I have a video on there from 4 or 5 years ago on making a handmade measuring tool from a yardstick and a bucket lid that is made to take your average height by just dropping it down the stick, and at balance, wherever that sits at, it'll push down as far as you need to. Otherwise, just kind of use common sense and eyeball it. For your inches, you can do it that way as well. But it's not going to be to the very tip of your grass, but it'll be to as far down as your grass pushes, just with something as light as a bucket lid sitting on it. And then, of course, when you're doing that, calculate for what you want your residual to be. And that allows for you to be in the place that you want to, as far as how much you want to feed your cow a day and how much you expect them to eat. So if you were feeding them a bale of hay, you'd roughly know how many pounds of feed you were feeding them. You can do the same thing with your forages. So when we go into that, so the data points are what's going to play in, and that's going to allow for you to make better decisions around your property, around your operation. So you're going to hear more new terms. They're gaining ground. Here's a silly one for you. I got a guy worked up on this a couple months ago. Carbon intensity. Ecosystem services, methane reduction, soil carbon, and biodiversity metrics. These terms describe the outcomes of good forage systems, but not new practices. You're already doing the practices. Taking the data is going to allow you to see where your metrics are. One of the things as well with keeping track of those is you have different soil programs now that are keeping up with more and more of these things. And I understand, like, the Haney test is one people will automatically want to grab with their brain. Hopefully, as we see more and more of these coming to light, the price of these will go down. I think the Haney test, the last I had asked about it, was like still over $200. But I know that Brady Kirshnevi from New Age Ag, that was on a couple months ago with his biologicals, he was talking about, and he's soon going to have a lab ready for his. So there's just continuous availability, more availability. I see a lot of ads for a couple other ones where we're going to see more labs available, and we're going to be able to have, I won't say more access, because anybody with a post office can mail it somewhere, but where we can find that information more available. as we continue to grow forward. Expecting fundings to change. So it's going to change in the programs and cost share. You're going to see more support for people that are in the cattle business, but not just the cattle business, but where people that are going to actually start getting more support in rotational grazing, your pasture rest stuff, your perennial establishment, cover crops, water systems. So programs that NRCS is also already offering, trying to get people to improve the way they're managing their soil as part of these cattle operations. I think there's going to be an extra emphasis on it. They're not going to be jumping up and down about what seed you buy. It's not going to be as much about this product or that product, but it's going to be educationally based, and then making sure you hit your timing markers, making sure that you have a standing cover on that field almost all year long, making sure that your forage quality is good, your grazing management is actually managed and not simply again, got the fence around all 40 acres and there they go, and that's not, that's all I need to do with it. There is going to change some stuff. You're going to have the carbon people jumping up and down again, wanting to get you to sign up for this program or that program. Some of them are going to be legitimate. Some of them's going to be predatory, just like every other type. You almost need to look at your carbon stuff like you do on mineral rights. Not to that extent, but a little bit. Like there's going to be some that are going to be set up to highly favor the company, and there's going to be some that are fair, and there's going to be some that, well, no, nobody's going to lose money. That's not in the cards. But all will require a lot of measurement on your part. It's going to make sure that you're documenting your field rotation, is going to be documenting all that. Make sure if you guys are looking at this stuff, read the fine print. What kind of commitment length? What are you selling exactly? And what do you have to give up? What does that entail? And how hard is it to get out of or in that contract? So those are, again, I think this is fascinating. I think it's something that can be a tool in the toolbox. Once again, it's not a band-aid to solve everybody's problem. I saw a thing the other day talking about if you aren't making money on your first business location, you probably shouldn't open a second one. And to an extent, that's almost my thought on this. Like, okay, if you're betting on this to save the farm through the programs versus actually changing into the system, you're gonna wind up in a bad place. And to Ernest's point from last week's podcast, the system itself as a standalone will pay the bills. It will pay the bills, and it will start you down a path of making money doing what you're doing. Just don't hang yourself out don't leave money on the table, but don't hang yourself out to dry expecting it to be the be all end all of all your money woes, if you have any. So just some thoughts I have on it. Again, this executive order, it pushes practices that already make producers money. You've got your pasture rest, which is more forage on the stem, deeper roots in the ground, rotational grazing, your better utilization, you're moving your animals through. Perennial grasses will give you stability, give you some weed resistance or some resilience, and give you hopefully some weed resistance through the pastures. Cover crops for soil protection and further weed suppression. Hay storage is one that I've harped on for a little while now and still accurate. You have more margin left over at the end of that. And then sampling, when you know your data, you are money ahead. You can make decisions if you can measure what you're doing. If you can't measure what you're doing, then it becomes a bit of a wash. So if you want to be geared towards working towards being compliant or whatever word you want to use, but to fall in and you don't have to go chasing it. Start sampling consistently, soil and forage. Document your grazing. Write it down in a notebook. Not any, doesn't have to be anything extreme. Protect your forage, which goes back to hay barns or tarps or baleage wrap, anything like that. But have somewhere that your hay is not costing you 25% shrink by sitting outside all year. Lean into your perennials. You might, it might be a stockpiling situation. And in annuals are tools. I am a firm believer in a 75-25 rotation, because with a 25% annuals, you're going to get the yields that will allow you to, that 25% is going to give you the yields that will allow you to be all over your summer grazing or anything like that, with the goal of getting away from having to feed hay half the year. Avoid the hype. If a program's too good to be true, it probably is. That can be for anything. Generally speaking, there is not a magic pill. There's good products on the market, and I hope I'm selling some of them, but you definitely don't need to be you definitely don't need to or want to be betting all your management practices on whether somebody had sold you the right seed or not. You need to know how to manage your program at first. So again, regenerative agriculture isn't new. Producers have been doing it years and years. This just is, the executive orders just gives me language and measurement to do what you're already managing for. If you're already rotating, resting, sampling, protecting forage, you're already doing the things that they're going to be asking. I just want to make sure there's awareness for it, and anything I can do to help be a sounding board or anything like that for you guys, happy to do that. Thanks for listening to Around the Fence Post.
As we wrap up today's episode, we hope something we shared helped you, challenged you, or gave you a new perspective. If even one moment stood out, please share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. That's how this community grows, one conversation at a time. You can find us as Around the Fence Post on Facebook and Wet Meadow Seed on Facebook and Instagram. We appreciate you being here. We'll see you next time, Around the Fence Post.